a joint deep down in my heart. I'm waking up with your love from the start. I'm chasing the rainbow through the rain. I know it's gonna be a beautiful day.
Do you see how God has woven the thread of 1,000,000 tiny miracles through each of your moments? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee. You know what it stands for. Conversations of Friends of Faith to encourage and equip. I'm Kim Crabill, so delighted to be your host and so delighted to be bringing today's guest on. She reminds us that we have moments. We have moments in our lives, and even in the moments of maybe grief or disappointment or tragedy, that they still are moments and we can make them count. So here to explain how she makes her moments count is licensed social worker, author, radio host, and my friend, Jenny Muscatell. Jenny, welcome to Coffee.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kim. I am so honored to be here with you, as always.
Well, I just love, and I think I just kind of mumbled over that social worker. I need to make sure that I said that right. Licensed social worker, author, and radio host, and speaker. I could just keep on, and a wife and mom, and so many things that I could add to that. You wear a lot of hats, my friend.
Thank you. Yes, it does get very busy, doesn't it, us ladies?
It really does. Well, I'm holding in my hand, and there'll be pictures of it on the screen, your two latest books. We Have Moments, Make Them Count, and 1,000,000 Tiny Miracles. Jenny, tell us what led you to putting these thoughts, because these are actually amazing. They're short, but they have beautiful pictures with them. Tell us about what causes you to want people to understand the moments and the miracles found in moments.
So, one of the things that I noticed throughout life is that God is present through every single detail that we experience. And we can notice that during our big victories, but it can be harder sometimes to notice that when we're going through the trials of life. And I've found that it's during those trials when He actually shows up. I think the strongest. The Bible tells us that God is close to the brokenhearted. And in 2013, I experienced one of the toughest years that I probably have ever experienced in my life. My mom had passed away that April. My husband died 2 months after that. And a few short months after that, my daughter, who was born with a congenital heart defect, had to have her seventh and then unexpectedly her 8th open heart surgery. And it was a year. But in the midst of all of that grief and pain and suffering and heartache, God wove the most beautiful story by showing up in the ways that only He can, that are unique to us, right? God talks to us in the most unique personal ways. And He would show up in those places that just let me know, I see you, I'm here.
Jenny, tell me how He did that. I know right now I'm working with a lot of people who have deep grief, just like yours. And I'm so sorry about all that. I mean, to lose your mom and your husband, and then to have that fear of losing your daughter. That's a lot of trauma for a person to go through. And to be able to, do you think, here's the question I want to ask. Do you think that you saw God in the moments as it was happening, or was it reflecting back that you saw Him?
Both, actually. When we're going through those moments, if we have our eyes open to it, He is there every step of the way. I remember just feeling so alone. There's a lot of times, I always called it the world of opposites. And I felt like that year was the year I learned how to live in the world of opposites. In one hand, I was very thankful and grateful that my husband knew Jesus and that he was alive and in heaven with Him. And that because of that, there was this promise that I could hold on to, that I would see Him again one day. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, He wasn't here with me anymore. And I was grieving beyond grief. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. And I still pushed through. I was still doing all those day-to-day tasks, trying to hold all the balls in the air, trying to do everything. but I would wake up at 3 a.m. and not be able to get back to sleep because I'd just be crying my eyes out. And it would be the little teeny things that would happen. I would get a text from a friend that would say, I hope your day is going well. And then God would give me a word about what hope truly meant. And I would hang on to that, and it would move me forward. I remember another day that I was driving to work, and I had to go back to work 3 weeks after my husband passed away. And I was driving to work, and I used to just talk with him like constantly because he never does leave us, right? And I would talk with him about every personal detail. And he had this way of validating each fear, each question, each hurt, each heartache. Like he had a way of bringing me a specific comfort for each one. When I was at my husband's grave one day, a purple butterfly passed over his grave. And in my heart, it gave me this idea of my husband has gotten his wings and he is alive in heaven. Well, because of that one moment, God kept revealing things to me in a way that would bring the color purple in, and it would give me comfort. I had this man, here's another great story. I had this man, his name was Bernard, and he was the sweetest man you could ever meet in your life. He was a piano tuner. He was our piano tuner year after year after year. And he showed up to tune our piano because we had our annual piano tuning scheduled. My life was a whirlwind. I had no idea what was even going on day to day. And he showed up to tune my piano, had no idea that my husband passed away, had no idea that my daughter was sick. But I forgot all that, right? I'm just in the midst of this storm. It didn't even occur to me. And he says, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm hanging in there. We all have those pre-rehearsed answers, right? But trying to get through. He's like, what do you mean? What's going on? And I said, well, since my husband died and since this is going on with my daughter. And he said, your husband died? I had no idea. Your daughter's sick? I had no idea. And he said, can I pray with you? And I said, yes, please, absolutely. And so this man who I never even knew to be a Christian, I didn't ever know him past. He was this sweet guy who came to tune my piano. He was about 88 years old. And he not only prayed with me, but he got down on my kitchen floor on his knees and held my hands. And he prayed and cried out to God in this beautiful, like heartfelt, powerful way. And it brought me so much comfort. And for weeks, he would stop by randomly and leave me a kind note on my door that I would come home to, and it would have a Bible verse in it. That was exactly the Bible verse I needed that day. Yes. Those little things are not little at all. They're huge. And that's, how God weaves our stories together.
Jenny, the thought that keeps coming to my mind as I'm hearing these stories is that really the miracles are delivered. They're the people around you. So what you're saying is I can be one of those little miracles in someone's life.
Yes. God definitely will use us to be salt and light. He tells us to go and be a light to the people around us. And it doesn't take a lot. We put that pressure on ourselves. We think, how am I going to help with this? This problem is so big. This thing is so big. But when God places on your heart a burden, right? That's what we call it. He burdens our heart with something that he wants us to do, something that he calls us to do. We may think, that's not going to make a difference. That's just this. They're really going through all this stuff. And that one little thing can make all the difference in the world. I had a friend who always called me by my last name, which at the time, I'm remarried at this point, but at the time my last name was Brackett. And so every single morning she'd text me, good morning, Jenny Brackett. And she'd give me a Bible verse. Not only was she sharing the love of God with me, but she used my last name. And I can tell you that made me feel so seen because I felt so lost in this world of chaos that had come my way.
That's I don't know, the simplicity of how God can work through us in huge huge ways. It's just something I feel like is one of the main lessons for today, because I think we all want to matter. And it's like you said, we forget that just the little messages that we can send, the little bits of encouragement, can be like what you call it, little miracles in someone's lives. That's if we're looking for a way to matter in our world, look around and see who we can encourage. Maybe is a good thing. Jenny, in the process of all that you were doing in that year, what do you remember most about the grieving process?
The thing I remembered the most was, here I am, I'm a social worker, right? I think that, I've spent the majority of my life helping people in the death and dying process, and have worked very hard to be a good support. I have all of that knowledge, so to speak, that book knowledge of what grief is, how do you cope with it, what are some steps you can take, those practical things. And they're useful, don't get me wrong. But what surprised me was they didn't scratch the surface of what I was actually going through. And what I found most of the time when people ask me, "How are you doing? What are you going through?" I didn't have words big enough to actually encompass what my whole experience was like. I didn't have words or the vocabulary to describe the depth of the grief. And, I think about Ruth in the Bible, and she was Ruth and Naomi, and I'm sure you know the story, but they had experienced so much loss and grief. She had lost her husband, and Naomi had lost her husband, but Naomi had also lost her son, who was Ruth's husband. And so there's all this grief that they are definitely experiencing together.
Mm-hmm.
And that bonds them. We miss that, I think, a lot. We talk so often about their faith and their strength and their bravery, but we forget the tragic bond between the two, and how nobody else can probably even begin to understand how much and just what they're going through better than each other, because they've experienced it together.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Naomi goes home, she says, Ruth, she gives her grace. She gives her, you go back to your home, get married again. It's like she's saying, giving her permission. I want you to have a good life, right? I want you not to be stuck in this. And she goes on to say, sorry about him. She goes on to say that I have, my life has become bitter. Like, don't even call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. I don't even recognize myself. I don't even know who I was or who I am. And she's like, so just go. But Ruth, on the other hand, is like, I will not leave you. I'm not going to leave your side. And so they go back to Naomi's homeland. And in the midst of all of this, Naomi's going out into this field where she's going to gather wheat and grain and these sort of things to help get them food. And it's all the leftovers. And Boaz, who's a kinship redeemer, owns this field, and he sees her there, and he goes up to her. And the part that really sticks out to me, I want to read it to you, is Ruth 2:10. It says, at this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. Now, what she's talking about is Boaz came up to her and he said, go collect the grain in the field. It's okay. I want you to. And the reason he did was because he heard what she'd been through, and he heard her faithfulness. And we all hear about that, but we forget, like I said, how much she was hurting and how much she was going through. And so she said, when he said that, she goes, at this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me?
Yes.
You notice me. He saw her. He saw her in a way that made her bow down to the ground. And we all know what it's like to have that nerve of vulnerability just struck, and it all just comes pouring out like the floodgates. But that's how God is with us every single day. And what surprised me was just how much I didn't realize that, how much I always knew God was there with me, always there, always present. But when that time came, it was like he was sitting with his hands on his cheeks, listening and hanging off my every word, just waiting, allowing me to go through that process and supporting me every step of the way.
I heard you say that that's what surprised you. I wonder, do you think it takes that type of grief or that type of pain to really know that deeper connection with God?
It did for me. I don't know if it does for everybody, but it definitely did for me. I think in life in general, person to person even, when you go through something together, you learn things about each other that you don't know until you've been put through the fire.
Right.
And so the same, I think, applies with your relationship with God until you've walked through that fire together and He shows you how you walk through and you don't get burned. Does it hurt? Sure. Is it hard to walk through? Sure. But does He bring us through that fire? He does, and He's there. But until you go through that, you learn those things about each other and your relationship.
Do you think that might be why so many people say, oh, I would never want to go through that again? But I'm so thankful I went through it the first time because I learned so much. And I feel like, if we don't, I think we get from God what we need from God. He says His grace is sufficient until we need that particular thing, that sufficiency. I don't know that we really dive into it and really experience it until we have that desperate need. At least I felt like that's the way it's been in my life. And I hear that exclaimed, not that we want people to have to go through hard times to understand. And I think that's one of the reasons we talk about this is that what we learned in the depth of hurt and pain, you can learn without having to go through that. There is a richness in Christ. Jenny, let's just talk about that for a minute. If there's someone out there and they're not in tragedy, how do they go to a deeper level of just knowing Christ where they are?
Definitely His word, right? When we spend time in God's word, we get to know Him so intimately. It doesn't matter what we're going through in terms of, the Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes, there is a time for everything under the sun. There's a time to mourn. There's a time for joy. There's a time to dance. There's a time to weep. There is a time for everything. And when we can see God in the presence of all of that, my husband loves to climb mountains. And at the top of that mountain, he can look out and he talks about it. I looked out at the top of the mountain. I went up with him and all I saw was fear. I don't like those heights, right? But he looks out over everything and it brings him close to God because he sees the beauty and the majesty of everything that is made by His hand. And for me, that's the ocean. I will sit in front of the waves and those waves crashing in. I see the bigness and the greatness and the glory of God. And so because He makes each one of us so unique, He's going to talk to each of us in different ways. And so, when we spend time in the Word, when we spend time in those places, wherever those places are that bring us close to Him, we're going to feel His presence, but also in that community, that family of believers, because the Bible tells us we are all members of one body, right? We all are members of the same body. And when we have each other and one of us falls down, we can pick each other up.
That's exactly right. So I have to get really raw with a question here because I think I started this a few minutes ago. I know so many people that I'm working with now, helping through some really tragic hurts, the loss of young children, just a tragedy that my heart doesn't know. And I know the right words, I know the right scriptures, but to feel that and walk through that with them. So I have to ask you this. Did you ever feel anger during that loss? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
I think that, when my husband passed away, or when we faced all of the different struggles and trials, because praise God, my daughter has come through those surgeries, but those battles were never easy. And there were times that I got angry. I would say my default reaction is probably less anger and probably more fear, and worry. And so when I would have those conversations with God, I think whether you're scared or whether you're angry, the question that comes up is why?
Yes.
Why? And so when we would have those conversations, I think the biggest thing that he would reassure me is that it's not about necessarily like that I'm going to get the answer to that now in this life, but he would sort of reassure me that it was okay that I was asking the questions, because he knew I was going to feel that way. He didn't hold it against me. I think a lot of times we can beat ourselves up when we feel that way, like, oh, I shouldn't be angry, I shouldn't be questioning, I shouldn't be all of these things. Where's my faith? Where's my this? Where's my that? But the truth is, our faith is not in our faith. Our faith is in the object of our faith, which is Jesus.
Yes.
And so, when I lost my husband, one of the most comforting things that anybody said to me was, I don't even have words. And I held on to that. And actually, there's a song by Aaron Shust that says, give me words to speak. And it resonated with me hugely, because just like I was saying earlier as well, I get it. I don't have words either. I don't have the words to even begin to unravel this.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is, for those who are sitting out there right now, as a social worker, as someone who's gone through tragedy, great tragedy, as someone who is just a believer, you're saying it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Am I correct?
It's okay, and God is not surprised by it. He will pick you up like a good father does, and he will hold your hand when your hand needs to be held, and he will comfort you when you need that comfort. And as Zephaniah 3:17 tells us, the Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who saves. He will quiet us with his love and sing over us with his lullaby. And those words, it's those, what I found actually interesting as well about going through that grieving process was something one day could bring me great comfort for that day. But I learned very quickly, and even for that moment, but what I learned very quickly was that what brings you comfort in one moment might not bring you as much comfort in the next moment. And you have a new obstacle, so to speak, that you have to overcome, or a new thought, or a new hurt, and it reminded me of the verse that says his mercies are new every morning. And those details, those million tiny miracles, those are how his mercies show up. They show up in that knock on the door right when you need it. They show up in that Bible verse that pops into your mind right when he gives you that word in your heart. They show up in a friendly, kind way that a nurse approaches you in the hospital. They show up in the grief that you share with somebody else who's shared a similar journey, or the excitement that you get. For me, a lot of times this is kind of it's probably different for everybody, but for me, after my husband passed away, I found people often saying, I'm so sorry to talk with you about how excited I am to do this with my husband, or that sort of thing, because I don't want to make you feel bad. And my reaction was just the opposite. I'm like, no, please tell me. You don't know how much it makes me have a heart filled with joy that you appreciate your husband's time that much, that you're enjoying this, because you never know when you might not have it, and so please, yes, tell me those joyful moments. I want to hear them.
Absolutely. Gosh, that's just so much that you're saying, I know is feeding into the fears and the pain. There's the pain of the loss, but then there's the pain of all the emotions that come with that. And guilt, is another one that's so huge that we have to deal with so often. Let me just, in thinking about that, and we're down to about 2 or 3 minutes, let me just ask you, are there thinking patterns? I know as a counselor, there's some things that we have to just change our thinking about. From a social worker's perspective, were there thinking patterns that you would say no to in the grieving process that helped advance you in your healing?
As a social worker, I think that it can be it's hard because I look at it differently now, having experienced both. I think as a social worker, I could normalize the grieving process very easily and say, here's the steps that you go through. They can cycle back and forth and around, but going through that on such a deep level with so many things hitting all at once, what I learned was it's very easy to get caught up in the shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
Yeah.
We try so hard to do the right thing. And when you're picking up pieces, grieving pieces, and you're still kind of maybe even in autopilot a little bit, you think, I have to do all this in my own strength, and I should have done it this way, or I could have done it this way, or maybe I could do A, B, or C. And those processes are honestly not that beneficial because we can tend to beat ourselves up. And
Yes.
it's not our strength that we get through any of this. And that's where I take off that social work hat. And I'm reminded that it's through God's strength that we can overcome these big obstacles, that we can, and overcome even is a word that doesn't quite fit the vocabulary, that we can grow through it, that we can learn to live with this new normal, that we can take on life again and find joy again and find hope again.
Oh, so such good and valuable information from someone who's walked through it. Let me ask you very quickly, how's your daughter doing?
She's doing great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Good. I know that's another of the trifold loss that you had. That thank God that the loss was not there with her. That she's been able to come through that and enjoys a very rich life. It seems like rich in all the things that God has for her. Well, Jenny, our time is up. I wanted to again. We're going to put up. You have how many books have you written, Jenny?
3 or 4.
or 5 or 6. So we'll be listing those, but your last 2, we have Moments, Make Them Count, and A Million Tiny Miracles. I want to take just a minute, Jenny. We have 2 minutes left. Take a minute and speak into anyone who is in great grief right now. What would be your word to help them in this moment of grief, that they have words that are not large enough to explain where they are?
I think that the biggest thing is first cling to God, cling to him, because he is going to understand what you can't put into words. He is going to give you a word that is going to fill your heart when you don't have the words to even describe what's going on. The second thing that I would say is to definitely share how you're feeling. Even if you can't put it into words, do the best you can with the people around you. It's so important to be honest and to be vulnerable about how you're doing, because it's way too easy to put on a brave face. It's way too easy to hide those feelings. And in doing so, we do isolate ourselves. And God doesn't want us to be isolated. He wants us to bear one another's burdens, to love on one another. And when we allow people to do that for us, and we might not always be comfortable with that, but by allowing others to love on us, we also allow them the opportunity to fulfill maybe a calling that God has placed on their heart to be a blessing.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I think what I hear you saying through all the incredible words you're saying is that we don't have to go through this alone, that God is with us and that he will send people to be the many miracles. And we have to take it upon ourselves to do that which God has called us to do, to not ever feel that just a text or just a note or just a stop by for coffee, that none of that is too small. It could literally be a miracle that holds people together. Jenny, thank you so much for your wisdom, for a life that you have turned into being such a voice of hope to so many people. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back one day.
Thank you so much. I always love to spend that time with you.
Absolutely. Well, friends, thank you so much. You know, life is about grieving processes as well as being on the mountaintops. It's all there. It's like Jenny was talking about in Ecclesiastes. There's so many emotions that we'll go through. One of the most important messages that we could ever hear is that we can be there for one another. We can be the miracle in someone's life by just reaching out and sharing with them a word of hope, a word of encouragement, a Bible scripture, or just showing up and saying, I don't have the words, but I'm here. Whatever it is that this has called you to do today, I know that you will do it in a way that will honor God and help someone else get through their grieving processes. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I can't thank Jenny enough for being here. Take what is in your heart to do and meet me back right here for coffee next time, okay? Bye, everybody.